Hey guys, how's everyone doing? This is Sir Jedi Sentinel, and welcome back to Sentinel Reviews. Our look at Doctor Who Series 15/Season 2 continues with Episode 3, The Well, co-written by Russell T Davies and, apologies, I'm going to butcher your name, Sharma Anjil, I think that's how you say your name. Again, I'm sorry. Anyway, as always, there is a blanket spoiler warning in place because I do this unscripted. So I may decide to talk about spoilers. And for this episode, I am definitely going to talk about spoilers. If you do not wish to be spoiled, Doctor Who streams in the UK on BBC iPlayer and internationally on Disney+. Overall thoughts. This is the first really good episode of this series. As far as personal entertainment factor goes, I don't know where I'd rank it. It's fine, but I can at least recognize its quality objectively. Because going through the episodes so far, the Robot Revolution was very middle of the road. It just had the benefit of having a really strong introduction for the companion. Lux is really good. I still like Lux the most so far. But Lux also, as you saw in my review, has a lot of nitpicks. The Well is just really good. I don't have many criticisms about it. Most of my criticisms, at least off the top of my head, again, unscripted, are really about the series arc stuff. And I guess I can just start with that there, because it's the same thing I've been saying. I don't care about Mrs. Flood. I'm sorry, again, just Russell T Davies shot himself in the foot with this arc, and I don't know what it is, because he's doing, structurally, the same story arcs he did in his first era. Loose string of references that the finale tells you meant something this whole time. AKA story arcs that are not stories. I've said this before, I think I talked about it in my Lux review, but strictly speaking, New Who. My favorite story arc is The Promised Land, Series 8. Series 8, in and of itself, is a very mixed bag of episodes. Some very infamously bad episodes, some decent episodes, some very underrated episodes. But The Promised Land is one of New Who's strongest arcs because, one, it's actually a narrative. It plays out following a story. It's not just, oh, hey, remember this word or phrase or thing you saw in a previous episode? That meant something. It's an actual story. It's not a Where's Waldo book. But also, with The Promised Land, the events of the episodes actually played into the story arc. There was, whereas Mrs. Flood and a lot of Russell's, and Moffat's for that matter, other arcs, don't. They are so, every time the series arc would pop up, it was just so detached from the events of the episode. Again, in comparison to The Promised Land, where that wasn't the case. And just someone else pointed this out too, and I think this is why I'm so frustrated with it. Structurally, the way they're doing Mrs. Flood now, it's basically taken over for Susan Twist. It is pretty much the exact same thing. Except, of course, Mrs. Flood knows who she is and what she's doing. But, again, the Mrs. Flood stuff has no bearing on any of the events of the episodes, and the Doctor still hasn't met her. You'd think for this being the series arc, you would build up and make that kind of important. Anyway, so let's move on. Performances for this episode are really strong. The character work isn't as great, except for two exceptions. The side characters are just cannon fodder. They're all red shirts, and they're really pretty bland. There's two really strong supporting characters, Alice and the leader of the rescue team. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting her name. But beyond that, again, just the side characters are kind of the weak point of this episode. Ncuti Gatwa gives a very powerful performance. In terms of performance, this episode is very similar to Boom, because the 15th Doctor is very energetic, very zip, 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 zip all over the place. And like Boom, this episode forces him to slow down, which is only to his benefit. I wanted to talk about this in the Robot Revolution, and I don't think I did, because it's kind of become a running joke in the fandom, Gatwa's tendency to cry. I'm of two minds about it. One, I think the repeated crying is a little ridiculous, because I think to show this Doctor is far more in touch with his emotions, and more allows himself to express himself. There are other ways to show that than the constant repeated crying. But on the other hand, I like it because Gatwa is doing something that has never really happened with the Doctor before, specifically in regards to the character of the Doctor. On a story-by-story basis, your mileage will vary. But when these side characters die, Gatwa is really the first Doctor that feels like these moments have weight. Even going to Classic Who, when a side character would die, the Doctor would mourn, but he would still ultimately just brush it off very passively. It was a very passive response. Here, Gatwa is giving those moments the weight they kind of deserve. Virata Sethu as Belinda is really good. Again, but for Belinda, this is one of her weaker episodes. Just because her... Note to self, mute your phone when you do this. But this is one of Belinda's weaker episodes because Belinda in this episode is so passive, whereas in the Robot Revolution and Lux, she was much more active, but here, things are just happening to her. So, that's just kind of overall thoughts, performances. Let's kind of break down the episode itself now. So, once again, trying to get Belinda back to the point which she was abducted from, May 24th, the Doctor and Belinda are again bounced off that date with no explanation of why they can't just go a day or two earlier and wait for the moment Belinda was abducted to drop her back off. Next week's episode has Ruby, so we're going back to contemporary Earth, so I hope that'll be explained. But anyway, but this time they are flung into the far future where they are kind of mistaken as part of a rescue team to try and figure out what happened to a mining outpost, where they find all of the miners are dead except for one survivor. Now let's get into the big thing about this. This episode is a sequel to Midnight, regarded as one of the best episodes of the Russell T Davies era. Also an idea I never wanted to happen. I never wanted a sequel to Midnight, just because with a creature like the Midnight Entity, something that doesn't even have a name, the Midnight Entity is just what the fandom calls it because it was found on the planet Midnight, and Midnight is the name of the episode. But a creature like that, and a premise like that, you keep revisiting it, you keep redoing it, and it's just gonna be diminishing returns. And there is a little bit of that here, I'm not gonna lie. I really didn't like that the episode ended with sequel baiting the Midnight Entity. The Midnight Entity got off the planet and might still be around or might come back. That was just, because again, it's like, because it's very obvious as you keep bringing this thing back and keep explaining it away, you're gonna ruin the illusion of what you're doing. Again, diminishing returns. But also, it just, with this really effective sacrifice that one of the side characters made to defeat it, you kind of just invalidated that and made it pointless. But anyway, back to that. So I still don't like the idea of a sequel to Midnight, but the execution is done well, even if it's the execution of an idea I don't like. So I will give credit pops for that. The Midnight Entity in this episode operates very differently from how it operated in Midnight. It still possesses people, but the nature of the possession is very different. I was going to say much more parasitic, but in Midnight it was pretty parasitic. How do I want to explain this? Okay, so like I said, the Midnight entity is operating on very different rules this time around. But it never feels out of character, so to speak. It never feels like it's so different from how it was in Midnight that it's not the same thing. Like the Macra in Gridlock. It still feels like there is a thread you can follow from Midnight to the Well and still see it as the same creature. I do like that every time that we still never see it, so I'm thankful for that. Every time you look up, you just flash. Like, Russell is creating that corner of the eye thing, like you see something flash by in the corner of your eye and you look up and you either don't see what you thought you saw or you see something completely different. He's playing into that really well. Actually, you know what I think happened here the more I think about it? I have no way to confirm or deny this, but I feel like during the pre-production, during the writing process, Sharma Angiawalful, again, sorry if I butchered your name, wrote this episode, and then RTD looked at it and went, this is so similar to Midnight, let's just make it a sequel to Midnight, and his co-writing credit was just to tie it into Midnight. That's just what I think. I don't know what actually happened here. Was there anything else I wanted to say? This is just a really strong episode overall. I don't have much to say in terms of singling out anything specific. Oh, well, there is one thing. So I think one of the strengths of this episode is that RTD is surprisingly really good at horror. Like Midnight or The Well, Wild Blue Yonder. And it's a pool it's a sandbox I wish he would play in more, but he seems, especially in Doctor Who, to just prefer camp, which is something he is not good at. Even outside of Doctor Who. Like, just to go on a bit of a tangent about this, Russell T Davies' adaptation of A Midsummer Night's Dream is easily hands down the worst adaptation of A Midsummer Night's Dream. But it's like Russell's strengths are in horror, are in tension, and Midnight really shows that, Upon the initial arrival, exploring the outpost, meeting Alice, the last survivor, the mounting tension up to the reveal that this is a sequel to Midnight is all expertly handled. The third act, when it suddenly shifts it from, tense horror into more action, kind of loses me a little bit, but there is still some good moments there, like when the Midnight entity possesses Belinda. But yeah, the third act just kind of loses a little bit of steam. That's all I was getting at. Also, I feel like I'm starting to see inconsistencies with Belinda, just as a character at this point. Keep in mind, I'm willing to be a little bit open-minded because she did just go through a very traumatic ordeal, but sorry about that. I finally muted my phone. But as I was saying, it feels like I'm starting to notice some inconsistencies with Belinda's character. So it feels like Belinda is going through this arc of a companion who doesn't really want to be a companion. In a lot of ways, she reminds me of Tegan. But in the Robot Revolution, we had that really good scene where she calls out the Doctor for his sort of dangerous behavior, or, the idea that he did a DNA scan of her without her consent. She calls the Doctor dangerous, and she makes it clear she just wants to go home. And then we get Lux, where she's talking about her family, but then she decides she kind of wants to explore Florida for the 1950s for a bit. Now what Lux did, Lux showed really well that Belinda was just there to kill the time. Like, once the vortex indicator, the Vindicator, as the Doctor calls it, was ready, she was ready to leave. And, you know, the Doctor kind of manipulated her into staying. So that it kind of gave way to this headcanon that Belinda can compartmentalize traveling with the Doctor until she ultimately gets what she wants, which is to go home. But then here, you know, they're still exploring. As they explore, Belinda has this really great scene where she talks about her dad in the pub with his friends and, you know, just the camaraderie and the fun everyone would have. And she really wants to go home because she misses them. And then by the end of midnight, she goes through this very traumatic ordeal. Like, basically, in order to get the Midnight Entity off of her, they had to fake her death, essentially. And just by the end of the episode, there was nothing about that. Granted, the way that episode ends, her and the Doctor were just completely exhausted, but there was no kind of call out, no kind of confrontation about that. It just, given what we've seen so far about Belinda, it feels inconsistent. But again, too, it also feels like, you know, that just by the end of that ordeal, they were both really exhausted. So I'm willing to be open-minded about that episode. We'll see where this arc goes with Belinda, and we'll see where, you know, the season ultimately goes with her. Because again, I still do really like Belinda Chandra. I think that's everything. I just don't really have a lot to say. The Well is a really good episode. It's a fantastic execution of an idea I never wanted. So, you know, I did really like it on those merits. There are great performances from Ncuti Gatwa and Virata Sethu. There's just really minor things, you know. Side characters aren't great. Season arc stuff still isn't good. But those are just my thoughts. Have you seen The Well? What are yours? Start a conversation in the comments below. Remember to like, comment, subscribe. Click the bell next to subscribe to get notifications when I upload. And in the description box below, you'll find the link to my Bluesky where you can follow me and get updates on the channel. This is Sir Jedi Sentinel, and I'll see you guys next time.